It's rare for me to find a book that's better on a second read, but will Why the Last Man be one of them? WOOFWOOF! Hey guys, it's me Marcus, aka the Mad Dog, and we're back with another video. Written by Brian K. Vaughan and illustrated by Pia Guerra, which is a name that I really hope that I'm pronouncing correctly. And there was also a few fill-in artists here and there, but the first issue of Why the Last Man was released by Vertigo Comics in 2002, with the 60th and final issue being published in 2008. And Yorick Brown is a broke street magician who spent the last of his money on food for his new adoptive pet monkey Ampersand, and an engagement ring for his long-distance girlfriend Beth. But then, in a single second, every living being with a Y chromosome is simultaneously killed, except for Yorick and his new pet monkey. But with the fate of humanity resting on the shoulders of an immature 22-year-old, can the world survive, or is this the end of life as we know it? And if we can manage that, what type of world is left for us, and do we even want to live in it? Well, for any females that are watching this, I mean, like, I would definitely be dead in this book. I can't lie, I've been really excited to talk about this book again, and I'm just glad that I can do a review of it for this channel, especially before the TV show comes out, mainly, you know, because of views, but also because I haven't read this book since I was 16, and when I read it that time, I remember thinking that Yorick was old. And I said at the beginning, is it possible for this book to be one that's better on a second read? And I think for me personally, it really was. But straight off the bat, I think the biggest strength of Why the Last Man is the incredible world building that goes on. This should come as no surprise when we're talking about Brian K. Vaughan, especially now when we look in hindsight, because of the fact that, you know, we've seen what he can do with Saga. But I think everything that Brian K. Vaughan is known for being great at started in Why the Last Man. But it would have been very easy for a concept like this to have just fallen onto the trope that this is going to be one of those, I'm the last man, I'm just going to have a shagapalooza. But there's layers to it. The political side of America is explored so that we get to see what it's like now that only women are in Congress. And admittedly, as a British person who doesn't really follow a lot of American politics because of the fact that I don't watch the news because it just always brings me down, it was done in a way that I felt it was still accessible to someone like me, which was one of the praises that I had for Ex Machina. And admittedly, it was one of the only praises I had for that title. We also focused on the social aspects and how the dynamics of relationships would change. The entertainment industry was touched on, and there was a really nice page early on where they just reminisced about all the musicians that would have died. And the best of it all was that it very rarely felt forced. It felt like organic conversation. It felt like these were elements that would come into this story. There was only one real bit where it felt like they stopped the story to focus on a different aspect, and it didn't really add anything overall. But for the most part, everything else was handled well, and it felt like Brian K. Vaughan really understood the world that he was telling a story in. Another thing that I have to praise is the fact that it developed as the book went on. So the world that you see in issue 2, because obviously issue 1's pretty much building up to the event, is very different from the world that you see in issue 20, issue 30, issue 40. You get the gist of what I'm doing. And throughout the course of this book, one thing that I think it did well is that it never let you stay too long in one environment. The core characters as well were all perfectly balanced, and when I read it the first time, I remember not really liking Dr. Man. I don't know, there was just something about her that I couldn't really get behind. It seemed like everything that she said was so condescending and negative that, you know, I kind of ended up becoming that. But even on that occasion, I can't deny that they all felt like real people. Even Ampersand had his own personality, which played well into certain scenes. Even the fact that Yorick annoyed the majority of people that he encountered is a trait that you don't really see a lot in a main character, except for maybe on this channel. I felt as well over the course of the book he did mature, and he ended up having a great story arc. It wasn't just him trying to be the savior of humanity, it was him trying to be the savior of himself. Agent 355 was a great character as well, and I really liked that they stuck to who she was for the majority of the book. There wasn't really any moment where she completely strayed away from what she was from the beginning, but at the same time they managed to develop her and give her a personality while still sticking to the role that she's got. But even though I felt like the handling of the main characters was great, the antagonist wasn't done as well. This was similar to how I felt when I was reading Paper Girls and Ex Machina, so I'm not sure if this is just a trait that runs with Brian K. Vaughan. Of course as well, I'm going to elaborate a bit more in spoilers, but I just felt like this was the type of story that didn't really need one main bad guy. And in particular, I liked in the early issues where it felt like there was different factions and you wasn't really sure what would be the deadlies towards Yorick. However, without saying too much about the ending, it does feel like there's some aspects of this story that are shoehorned in just so that there can be a big climax at the end. And the worst part is that it never felt like it was building up towards this final moment between two characters. It was just a story that was going along at its own pace. Given the fact that it was so grounded and realistic, even considering the concept that it's got, this is probably the one major blip that I think about that means that I can't really say it's the greatest comic of all time. Because sure, yeah, an ending should build up towards something, but at the same time, it felt like it was going in a different direction, and then at the end he just realised that he needed a bad guy. And if I'm being honest, the Ampersand probably felt like the greatest threat throughout this entire book, but it doesn't feel like they ever really had a final payoff. And I just like the concept of a group of crazy feminists that have gone so overboard that they're still blaming men for everything, even after they're all dead. And if I'm being honest, that's probably the most realistic part of this book. I actually wish that they would have played more of a role throughout the entire book rather than just being something that was featured at the beginning. And it goes back to, like I'm saying, that having a group is more intimidating for a character like Yorick than just having one person that's coming after them. The art is serviceable, and I had this debate with myself when I was deciding on whether or not to upgrade to the absolutes because of the fact that I don't really think it's got that wow factor. It's got this nice clean style that never really interferes or distracts from the story that it's telling, which at the core is what art should do. But at the same time, when fill-in artists came into the book, I never even really noticed. An artist's change can sometimes be for the better, but I think the fact that it isn't even noticeable when that difference does occur kind of says something about the art overall. And I'm not even saying the art's bad, like when the world's being built, you can see for miles, it's clear that a lot of detail does go into each panel, and the majority of the characters all look distinctive and expressions are conveyed well. And of course, art is subjective, which is something that the internet can often forget. But for me personally, I think I prefer a more stylized type of look, and that wasn't something that I got here. And this is very much a situation where the art is a vehicle for the plot rather than something that's the main attraction. And considering this as a more grounded style, it probably did work better for it because of the fact that it wasn't something that was entirely abstract. But one aspect of the art that I do have to give respect to is J.G. Jones on the covers. These are iconic. When you think Why the Last Man, you think the covers more than you do the interiors. The painted style really gave this eerie feeling. I can't really put my finger on exactly what it is, but I did often find myself lingering on those covers. But in terms of the writing, there's just so many great twists and developments. I've said before that this feels like BKV's magnum opus, and I'm gonna stand by that because of the fact that Saga hasn't been completed yet, and it's because it's so clear that he's in tune with the narrative. It felt like from issue 1 he knew the exact story that he was planning to tell. I'm not sure if Saga's gonna be the same, and you can debate that maybe it's better to not know everything before you've even started writing the first page. But that's not a debate that I'm really gonna have here. But it's clear from the fact that he knows when to introduce new elements or maybe give us a different scenery, and even how to build those deeper connections, sometimes with characters that only appear for a couple of issues. Yes, I know I've commented about how the antagonist feels a bit shoehorned in, but every other aspect of the story doesn't feel like that. It's one of those rare books where I don't think there was much room for it to be shorter, but at the same time, I think it finished its story at its natural point. But to play devil's advocate to that, there was 2 issues that I skipped, and that's the part where there's some kind of play that's going on. So yeah, I read neither of these, and I don't feel like I missed out on much. It wasn't that I had to go back and check something that happened in the pages. I could just continue on the story, and it was almost like that part never happened. It did feel a little bit like a case of style over substance, and there's some aspects where that works well, kind of like when Yorick's having a dream, but this was the one part of the story that just didn't work for me. But if I'm looking at it objectively, considering the fact that there's 60 issues and there's only 2 that I had to skip out on, that's pretty good going. I have to give it respect because it helped towards that world building that I did really enjoy, and it showed how entertainment would go back to its roots and also the importance of it within our society. But this is the one part of the story where I can really point to it and said that felt like it put everything else on pause. Also, I'm not sure if this is just on me because of the fact that I read it really quick, but the passage of time can be quite jarring, and it is great that there's subtle little aspects like Yorick's hair keeps growing. It's not a major problem, and as soon as I realised it, I noticed that it would have been in line with when the book was actually being published. And I'm not saying that it derailed the reading experience or anything like that, but it was something that occasionally threw me for a bit of a loop. However, I enjoyed the majority of the flashbacks that were in this, especially when it was for the main characters. And when I'm talking about BKV's understanding of the entire narrative, this is the part that I'd really point to because of the fact that they came at perfect parts of the story. 355's came at the moment where you were just about to learn exactly who she was, but they didn't come too early, and they came at a point where you were really starting to learn about her as a human being. And the main strength of these was that when they happened, the world just looked completely different because of the fact that it was before the plague hit. I found myself picking up on things because it looked so different, and I think that that works great in a post-apocalyptic book. Although one thing that I did notice keep cropping up whilst I was reading this is that it felt like there was way too many characters. Minor spoilers, but it is to illustrate my point, but there are 3 different characters that are called Beth. And at first it's a clever nod, but then the characters remain in the book at the same time. I don't know, maybe that's just me because like I said in all my reviews, I am a dumb reader, and it's only a minor of thing, and of course I've met other people that are called Marcus, and in my job I even ended up speaking to a customer that had the same full name as me. But that strength that I talked about with it showing you how the whole world adjusts to this plague in this new world that they're living in is also part of its detriment, because of the fact that you've got characters that are living in a farm, you've got characters that are living in the White House, you've got characters that are living in a ship, you've got about 3 different armies, you've got an acting troupe, and at the same time it only really adds little tidbits to the overall story. It would be difficult to balance, and it feels like I'm being a bit of a hypocrite, because on one hand I'm saying how it's great how it explores so much of this world and shows us so many different perspectives, but then at the same time I'm saying there's almost too many characters and too many perspectives. It's just a bit annoying when a character reappears after quite a few issues from when they were introduced, and I have to go back to the earlier part of the story to just remind myself of who exactly they were. As well, and like I said, I'm not getting into spoilers just yet, but if you're somebody who likes a definitive answer to questions, then you may be a bit disappointed with some of the parts of this story. I'm going to try to remain vague, but some of the bigger questions of the story do have a concrete answer. They're just not in the book, and you will have to look at interviews and stuff like that if you don't want it left in an ambiguous position. That wasn't really an issue for me, because I like plots that tell me a story about an interesting situation rather than trying to explain the actual interesting situation that happened. But if you're somebody who's more about the destination rather than the journey, then you may feel like Why the Last Man falls a bit short. Speaking generally about the ending as well, it's just way too heartbreaking. Like honestly, if they made a new edition of Why the Last Man, and instead of the last 3 issues of this book, it just has Brian K. Vaughan come round to your house and stab you, I'm probably going to end up getting that because it'd be a less painful experience. Now I am known for being a bit overdramatic, and it's just something that I take in my stride, but it does feel like this book doesn't want you to leave with any kind of positive feeling by the time you get to the ending of it, so if you're the type of person that doesn't like books that end that way, avoid this one. However, I can't really talk about the ending much more without jumping into spoilers, so if you don't want anything else about this book ruined, I'd recommend skipping to the final verdict timestamp down below. Or if you are jumping off here, why not pick up the Why the Last Man Omnibus from the channel sponsor Organic Price Books. I can't lie, if you've made it this far into the video, you definitely deserve a treat, so I'd recommend picking it up from there, and if you use code WOOFWOOF, you'll get $2 off your order. And you can use that code as many times as you like, so feel free to check out if there's something that you want from there. As well, this video only got made because we hit the like target during the Paper Girls review, so let's see if we can do it again and smash 100 likes. And definitely make sure that you subscribe, because I'm always trying to come out with new videos. But yeah, now this is your final spoiler warning. I'm gonna have to start by talking about the ending because I feel quite mixed on it. I know there's some people who really don't like how this book finishes, but I haven't really heard enough opinions to determine what exactly it is that disappoints people. But for me, it was kind of middle of the road, because I really like the fact that it gave you an actual ending, that it said, yes, this is the future, this is what we're working towards, and this is the world that we're left with now, rather than it being the case that it could have ended in France just after 355 died, and then we never really know what the result of that is. And I don't think it really dropped the ball in a similar way that I felt when I was reading Ex Machina, because that felt like it was building up to something from issue 1 that just ended up being sort of like an afterthought. So I have to at least give respect to the confidence that BKV had to give his story the conclusion that he wanted. He could have played it safe, left it more ambiguous, and left you wondering and maybe piecing the things together for yourself. But besides some of the deaths of characters that you could probably predict because of the fact that it was 60 years in the future, there wasn't really like a main shocking moment that I thought this book closed on. Yeah, it left Yorick's fate ambiguous, and I like to think that he's just running about Paris pretty much naked the entire time. And I do like the parallels between the first issue and the last issue, even though I do think it was a bit obvious and in your face. Like I said, I'm a dumb reader, so if I can figure it out, you really have not disguised it well. But I said this in the spoiler-free section, but this is very much a book that's more about the journey rather than the destination. And that's fine, I think it just depends on what you like as a reader, and when it's a 60-issue book, I can pretty much forgive it if it doesn't exactly stick the landing, when the rest of the 58 issues have been pretty decent. I don't know why I said 58 there, I think I was mentally trying to take out the ones that were about the theatre troupe, and I just didn't do it right for some reason. But there was a lot to unpack in this final issue, and the first thing that I want to touch on is Dr. Man's death. I can't lie, I wasn't really too sad about the fact that she did die, it was more the fact that Yorick didn't get to say goodbye. There was a show that came out in the UK at the beginning of this year called It's a Sin, and that was the thing that really hurt the most when characters died. It was the fact that you never got to say goodbye to him. And it's the same situation here, because it's obvious that Yorick is still in pain after the assassination of 355. And even though Ampersand is still alive at this part in the story, Allison is his last connection to it. So it was bad enough that 355 got taken away from him, but now he's got to deal with the fact that he couldn't get to Dr. Man in time. And like I said, this is my second time reading this book, and I think that's why it had much more of an impact on me, because it was only last year that I did unfortunately lose one of my very close friends, and I never got a chance to say goodbye to them. So I really managed to empathise with Yorick this time round and understand that it is difficult when you know that you're never going to get a chance to say goodbye or say thank you for all the things that that person did for you. And in a similar way, even though I knew that Ampersand was going to die, that was something that was a complete secret to me the first time that I read it, but this time I was fully prepared as I went into it. As I was reading the book and Ampersand was being cute, I kept just saying to myself, don't get attached, you know what's going to happen. But I can honestly say that this is one of the saddest things that I've ever read in a comic, and it might be the fact that I just haven't read a sadder book than this. I know a lot of people want me to read Mouse, but the fact of the matter is that people tell me that that's a book that's going to make you upset, and that to me is like saying eat this chicken because you'll get food poisoning. It's not a situation that I want to be in, but everything about that Ampersand death scene is just unbearable. The build up to it and the fact that he's surrounded by all these clones and it just doesn't seem like any of them are the Ampersand that we know, and the fact that they're in the snow and there's this slow build up and then he feeds him a grape because he's so weak, and there's that moment where Yorick doesn't know if he should have done it and he's got a bit of regret towards it, and then they zoom out and you realise that he's at the grave of 355. Like, I'm not going to try and get too real with you here, but a few years ago we had to put my Shih Tzu to sleep and we'd had him for about 15 years, and that dog was my best friend. So the first time that I read Why the Last Man, Barney, my dog, was very young, so it wasn't really a situation that I ever considered, and this time when I was reading it, I was in that situation with Yorick, and it was just 100 times worse than the first time that I read it. Like, to me, Ampersand's death was more impactful than 355's, and that was another one that came as a complete shock. The weird thing is, like I said, I knew it happens towards the end of the book, but I couldn't even remember the exact point, and it still came as a bit of a surprise. Even though this was a massive loss, and I really felt it as I was reading it, I just didn't really buy into Yorick and 355 as a couple. I'm not sure if that was just me, and yeah, they gave these hints to it throughout the entire book, but I just didn't really see them together. I much preferred Dr. Man and 355 being together because I thought that was a more believable couple. When I saw 355 and Yorick together, it just felt like they had a really good little brother and big sister dynamic going on, which made more sense to me because of the fact that Hero was now joined up with the Amazon, so he's kind of lost the sister that he had. But I think for me, 355's death would have been more impactful if it would have been the case that they never actually got a chance to express their feelings to each other, because then it would have been this what if situation. They wouldn't have been able to discuss it, and I know they never got a chance to actually be a couple, but they did know how the other felt. In the same way that he didn't get to say goodbye to Dr. Man and he wasn't sure if he should have poisoned Ampersand, I think this would have been the most fitting way to close that story. Like, I'm not sure if I'm in the minority here, but I wouldn't have enjoyed it if 355 and Yorick would have ended up as a couple and that would have been the happy ending. I much prefer Yorick with the second Beth, and I like in the last issue that they said that they tried to maintain some kind of a relationship. It's just a shame that unfortunately it didn't seem to work out, because I would have liked to have seen Yorick at least have some kind of happy ending. And honestly, I don't believe that 355 was that for him. I know that opposites attract, I just feel like this wouldn't be a good couple. But yeah, the way that the paneling was done and how they revealed this death was just executed perfectly, and no, that's not some kind of like awful pun. But speaking of couples that I didn't think made any sense, why did Hero and Beth, the original Beth, end up together? It just felt like it was there for the sake of being there, because it was just referenced at the end of the scene and then Yorick disappeared, so you didn't even really get a reaction from him. Like, I'm an only child, so correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think it's normal for a sibling to end up going out with someone's ex. Actually, I'm from Stoke, that happens all the time. But I'm glad that Hero got some kind of happiness and closure, because I really liked her arc throughout this book. Seeing her go from a rookie Amazon hunting her own brother to killing the leader and then being haunted by her ghost, and not in a way that sounds gimmicky, to then searching for her brother and helping to become part of the cause that helps humanity to survive. Hero was a really interesting character, and I felt like she had all the traits that you'd expect from the main character in a book like this, and I actually wish we could have spent a bit more time with Hero towards the end of the book, because it was like I was saying, I just felt like there was too many characters, and it was often the case that you'd be away from one of them for so long that you forgot what they were doing by the time they got back. Another thing that I just found to be a bit odd was how early on Yorick's mother was killed compared to when the reaction came. I know I've praised quite a few times about the pacing of the book and that I felt like it knew exactly where the narrative had to go, but this was quite a blip on the radar. But considering how important of a character she was to the beginning of the story and also to the main character, it was only in the last couple of issues that he even found out that she was dead. Sure, yeah, we did see the former model who was disposing of the bodies get called to the White House to take care of the situation, and this is what I was saying as well, that I felt like they forced the main bad guy into the story in the form of Alter. She got taken out very easily when she first confronted Yorick and the gang, so it didn't really make sense that they'd put much importance on it. Like I said, I thought there'd be like a second wave of the Amazons and that was going to be the main threat. Alter never really struck me as that intimidating because of the fact that a large amount of the characters in this book could manage to get the better of it. So to then have her be the one who killed Yorick's mother didn't really feel like it had as much of an impact as it wanted it to have. And again, there wasn't really that major reaction from Yorick because he was already trying to kill Alter because of the fact that she just killed 355. I just felt like it was one of those situations that didn't ever really need to happen, and like I said, I wasn't really a big fan of Alter as the bad guy. I did like Yorick's approach to the situation at the end, that he wasn't willing to kill it and that he sort of worked out that she was also in a similar situation to him. That was kind of nice, but I felt like they could have done that much sooner and that it wasn't really worthy of being the climax of this book. What was a great climax to the book was the fact that Beth was planning to break up with Yorick at the moment when the plague hit. He's then spent 5 years searching for her to only find this out, and I was wondering, why didn't Beth just say nothing? You know he was going to propose, you know that no good is going to come out of the situation by telling him that. Like, how did she expect him to take this in a positive way? But in this continuing story about Yorick always getting the short end of the stick, I just thought that was the most bitter, ironic moment that they could have. That Yorick's entire quest was pretty much for nothing. As well, it got hinted at in the book that there's quite a few possible explanations that caused the plague in the first place. I never really subscribed to one exact explanation, and I think that worked better for me. Because like I said, the most interesting post-apocalyptic stories are the ones that tell you a story about a character that's just dealing with that situation rather than trying to figure out the situation itself. Of course, there was always going to be an element of that. These characters are of course going to wonder what exactly caused all the men to die, but it was something that was bigger than the main characters that we've got, so it wouldn't have really made too much sense if they had figured out what caused it. I liked as well that each different explanation geared towards a different aspect of society. So one was based on science, one was based on politics, one was based on religion, you had ones based on ancient history like with the Culper Ring. So I think whatever type of thing you look towards in your own life would give you the answer to what caused the plague. And the ones that made the most sense to me was either the clones caused all the Y chromosomes to be killed because of the fact that men were no longer needed, or the one that I've now heard is the actual explanation for it, which is that the Chinese let off a virus to kill all the men. And that's what I was talking about in the spoiler-free section. Because of the fact that there is an answer, you just have to search for it. But with a book of this size, it's difficult to dissect absolutely everything that happened in it, and also if people don't watch the spoiler section, it kills any chance of this video getting promoted. But to round it out, I am going to touch on my favourite arc within this book, which was the one where they were on the farm that turned out to be full of female prisoners. I think this was absolutely textbook in the way that you tell a great story. You start by getting introduced to this new environment that seems like some kind of paradise compared to the world that you've come from. You get to know some of the locals, they all seem warm and friendly, but at the same time it's clear that there's something that they're hiding. Yorick even manages to find a girl that he's interested in, the first of pretty much many, and then the curtain drops and everything's revealed. As well, considering the fact that this was my second read through, I actually forgot what the twist was at this part of the book. Because I think with the longer series it's so easy to focus on the end of the book because that was the most recent part that you read. So it was nice that there was still some kind of surprise in this for me, and it really made it enjoyable, and there was also other parts throughout the book that were similar to this. Which is why I'm saying that even if it has been quite a few years since you've last read this, I definitely recommend giving it another read through. Because even stuff like the San Francisco arc, the Japanese arc, the bit in Australia, the bit on the ship, all of these were still great and held up to date, and this is one of those books that I think will become a timeless classic. But yeah, before we jump into my final verdict, this is something for just the people who are still watching the spoiler section, and I'd like to hear your thoughts in the comments below. But should it be the case that I do reviews in two different ways, that I have a spoiler-free review for people who don't want anything ruined, and then a separate video where it's a full-on spoiler discussion so that people can just enjoy that? I'm not really sure how to do it in future because with the longer series it is a little bit more difficult, and like I said, I have no clue how I'm going to review The Walking Dead in one video, but still, let me know. This is my final verdict, and I'm often told that I'm way too harsh when I'm reviewing books and giving the final score, but for me, hunting for the perfect comic is what keeps me reading. And if I'm being honest, I'm glad I haven't found it, and I haven't even found it here with Y the Last Man, which is one of my favourite series of all time. So it's very unlikely that a book is ever going to get 100%, even a 90% is very difficult because it means that there's very little room for improvement. When I find a book that is 100%, it's pretty much time to give up reviewing books on this channel because what else is there to read? The closest that any media has come to a perfect score is Terminator 2, which got a 98%. But Y the Last Man, after my first read through over 10 years ago, made it very high into my top 5 favourite comics of all time, and it was never really in any danger. And it still isn't now because this is a book that holds up despite the fact that I already know the majority of the plot points and that it's been an extra 10 years since it was published. But I still can't say that it's perfect. There are still some aspects of this story that I don't really care for, such as some of the side subplots, the cumbersome cast of characters, and an art style that never really has that wow factor. However, to still have a book that on its second read through is still exciting, engaging, and manages to hit on an emotional level is something that I can't take lightly. Brian K. Vaughan managed to pen one of the most enjoyable experiences that I've had in comics, and it was even better on the reread. It knew what parts of the world to focus on and how to develop its characters, and even when to pull the rug from underneath us. In this day and age, there's always somebody that will disagree with our opinion and won't see where we're coming from, and the most dangerous thing to my opinion of Y: The Last Man wasn't anybody else, but it was my own revisiting of it. It was something that I was already cautious of because of the fact that I was a little bit disappointed when I went back and read Batman Hush, but Y: The Last Man managed to do something that only a handful of entertainment properties have been able to, and give me a better experience the second time round. This is a sentiment that I hope follows when I eventually read this again, maybe another 10 years from now if I'm still doing this channel, and I just hope that the TV show manages to do this justice so that more people can get invested into this amazing series. But even if the adaptation isn't great, there will always be this book that I can go back to, and because of that it's going to get a very high, and I think the highest score that I've given in a review so far, but 87%. Woof woof! So that's the review, and I hope that you've enjoyed it. Feel free to check out one of my other videos, but until next time, whenever that may be, just make sure that you stay safe, stay reading the best books that you can find, and stay mad all you dogs. Woof woof! See you at the next video.